Welcome my good smelling friends. Today we're going to talk about the Armani Code line, and we're going to do a comparison between the original and some of its best flankers. And that will be the Armani Code Eau de Parfum, the Armani Code Profumo, the Armani Code Absolu, and the newest released from the line, which is the Armani Code Parfum. I'm not going to describe the scent of the Armani Code, because if you are here, it means you already know how it smells, but you want to see what's the difference between the original and the other releases from this line. So let's start with the original and the Eau de Parfum. The Eau de Parfum feels like a more intense version of the original, and it's the closest to the original DNA, as it keeps most of the original smell, but it's just more intense in the opening. So in the opening, it feels like it's indeed a stronger version of the original, but it doesn't last much longer than the original does. However, even if it's stronger and even if it's supposed to be a stronger version of the original smell, it smells like it's lacking something. And to me, it feels like it's missing that tobacco note that made the original smell that great. Because the EDP lacks that tobacco note, it feels like it's a more younger version of the original DNA. The tobacco note in general adds maturity to the fragrance. Now let's go to Code Profumo, which I owned up until a couple of months ago when I sold it, because I felt like it was too linear and it smelled a bit dated. So in comparison to the original, the Code Profumo, and I think it might be because of the lavender, which makes the fragrance smell a bit dated, but it retains a large portion of the original DNA, and it has this powdery effect that makes the fragrance project much better than the original. However, this powderiness might feel a bit overwhelming sometimes. To me, Profumo was the best performing Code flanker, but it had some of the notes too amped up and it felt overwhelming and linear, as it didn't feel like it was changing too much. Then we have the Code Absolu, which this and the Profumo was considered to be the best flankers so far. Some people prefer the Absolu, and I can understand why. However, I prefer the Profumo now that I've smelled better the Absolu and I was able to compare it better to the Profumo, because the Absolu is much sweeter and I think it's the sweetest out of all flankers. I do like the opening better of the Absolu compared to the Profumo, but this one then becomes too sweet, and the sweetness reminds me a lot of the sweetness that came from Paco Rabanne's 1 Million. To me, it's undeniable that the sweetness is very similar to 1 Million. But the Armani Code Absolu respects the title Absolu, which usually is a thicker, a deeper, richer version of the original code, but I don't feel that it's as complex as the original code. In fact, I think the original code is the most complex and the most balanced out of all flankers. The performance is very good on Absolu. It's not as good as Profumo, where Profumo projects better because of that powdery effect. This one is smoother, but lasts a long time. And then we have the newest release, which is Code Parfum. Now, they already had a Parfum version released, which is Profumo, which means Parfum, but in Italian. But I guess they just followed the trend of designers releasing the Parfum version of their already existing fragrances. And I'm not going to criticize the naming of the fragrance or the bottle, because we're here to talk about the juice, and I think the juice is very, very good, and I think it's the best flanker so far. Funny story, before going to smell the new release, the Parfum, I was thinking I was going to smell it and I was going to be disappointed, because I know they've discontinued the Absolu and the Profumo, which were the best flankers, and I thought they needed to discontinue them so they could release something worse that wouldn't be able to compete with these flankers. Then I smelled it and it totally took me by surprise. So the Code Parfum added iris to the original Code DNA. They added it in a good taste. It doesn't go too powdery, it's just there to tweak it a bit, to make it smell more up to date, to make it able to compete with the other iris fragrances. It's not going to be an overwhelming iris, it's just there to give it a bit of freshness, to make it smell a bit more modern, different. Because the way the modern fragrances are made these days, they're going two ways from what I've noticed. One, it's the Paco Rabanne Invictus way, where the fragrance is going to be fruity and it will have this aquatic freshness, or it will be sweet and it will have this iris powdery freshness. And I also like that they kept a lot of the original DNA, even though in the opening it will smell more like Le Male, Le Parfum, or the other modern fragrances which have iris. But this will only last for, let's say, a couple of minutes, where the smell is more iris rather than the original DNA, but then it will return to the original DNA. It will still retain some of the iris, it will be in the background, and it will just make the fragrance smell different, making it smell like it's worth having this other flanker instead of the ones that were already released. The performance of Parfum is also very good. I still think it's lacking projection. For example, if you compare the performance, the projection more exactly, to the Le Male, Le Parfum, Le Male projects better. And that was it, guys. That was my take on the Armani Code line and some of its best flankers. Armani Code is such a great and unique fragrance, but some of its flankers are not always that great. Until the next video, you keep smelling great.